Commander Veltar stood on the bridge of his massive ship and watched the blue planet spin slowly below them. His long fingers moved across the control panel as data flowed into his mind through the neural link. Earth was the third planet from a yellow star, and it looked perfect for what the Zephyrian Empire needed. The planet had water and plants and the right kind of air. More important, it had intelligent life that could be useful to the Empire. Veltar had spent weeks studying the creatures that lived on this world. They called themselves humans, and they seemed weak and small compared to most species. The Empire had met Veltar was tall and thin, like all his people. His skin was pale green, and his eyes were large and dark. The Zephyrians had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years by bringing order to chaos. They found primitive worlds and helped them join the Empire as workers and servants. It was a good system that brought peace to everyone. The humans fascinated Veltar in a strange way. They were always fighting each other over small things like land and resources. They had divided their world into hundreds of different groups that competed and struggled against each other. This seemed wasteful and dangerous to Veltar, who came from a species that had learned to work together long ago. His science officer approached him with new data. The humans had basic technology and weapons, but nothing that could threaten a Zephyrian ship. They had not even managed to travel to other planets in their own star system very often. Their largest weapons could barely scratch the hull of the smallest Zephyrian vessel. Veltar made his decision. The humans would be given the standard offer that all primitive species received. They could join the Empire peacefully and take their place as a servant class, or they could resist and face the consequences. In his experience, most species chose to join once they saw the power of Zephyrian technology. The communication was sent to every major human government on the planet. The message was simple and clear. The Zephyrian Empire claimed dominion over Earth and all its inhabitants. Humans would surrender their weapons and submit to imperial authority. They would be relocated to designated areas where they could work for the benefit of the Empire. Resistance would be met with force. Veltar expected the response to come quickly. Most species surrendered within hours of receiving the ultimatum. The smart ones realized they had no choice when faced with technology far beyond their understanding. The Empire was not cruel, but it was absolute in its authority. But something strange happened. Instead of surrender, the humans sent back messages of defiance. Their leaders spoke of freedom and independence. They said they would never bow to alien rule. Some even threatened to fight back with their primitive weapons. Veltar was confused by this response. He had studied human history and seen how easily they conquered each other. Small groups of humans with better weapons had defeated much larger groups throughout their past. Surely they could understand that resistance was pointless when faced. With such overwhelming superiority, the humans continued to refuse submission even after several days of warnings. Veltar received new orders from the High Command. The Empire would demonstrate its power with a limited strike. A few of their coastal cities would be destroyed to show them the futility of resistance. This usually ended any thoughts of rebellion very quickly. 3 coastal cities were selected for the demonstration. Veltar watched as the energy beams lanced down from orbit and turned the human settlements into glass and ash. The destruction was quick and clean. Hundreds of thousands of humans died in seconds. Veltar felt no pleasure in this, but it was necessary to maintain order. He waited for the surrender that always came after such demonstrations. The humans would see that resistance was impossible, and they would accept their new place in the Empire. But instead of surrender, something unexpected happened that made Veltar feel cold, fear for the first time in his life. The humans did not cower or flee or beg for mercy. Instead, they became angry in a way that Veltar had never seen before. News. Broadcasts from around the planet showed humans gathering weapons and preparing for war. They were not scattered and afraid, as they should have been. They were uniting in rage. Veltar watched in growing alarm as human military forces mobilized across the globe. They spoke of revenge and justice and made threats against the Zephyrian fleet. Their leaders appeared on every communication channel, declaring war against the Empire itself. This was not the response of a defeated people, but of something else entirely. For the first time in his long career, Veltar began to wonder if the Empire had made a mistake. The humans were acting like predators instead of prey. Their eyes held a cold fury that reminded him of the ancient stories his people told about the dangerous creatures that had once hunted them on their home world before civilization tamed their environment. The High Command demanded to know why the humans had not surrendered. Veltar had no answer. In all the centuries of imperial expansion, no species had ever responded to a demonstration of power with such unified defiance. Something was very wrong with these creatures, and Veltar began to suspect that the Empire had awakened something that should have been left sleeping. Dr. Lisa Hamilton stared at the alien debris scattered across the laboratory table and felt her hands shake with barely controlled anger. 3 days had passed since the aliens had murdered millions of innocent people in their coastal cities, and the world had changed forever. Every piece of wreckage told a story about creatures who thought humans were nothing more than insects to be stepped on. Lisa had been working at the government research facility in Colorado when the attacks happened. As the world's leading expert on theoretical xenobiology, she had been called in to analyze every scrap of alien technology that could be recovered. What she found both terrified and excited her in equal measure. The alien ships were clearly built by creatures who had never faced real danger in their entire evolutionary history. The hull materials were strong but light like the bones of birds. The weapons were powerful but designed for use against targets that could not fight back. Most telling of all, the ship systems were heavily automated because the aliens themselves seemed unable to make quick decisions under pressure. General Jake Morrison arrived at the lab as Lisa finished her latest analysis. His face was grim, and his uniform showed the strain of 3 days without sleep. The general had been tasked with coordinating humanity's military response, and he needed every advantage he could get against an enemy with superior technology. Lisa showed him her findings on the main display screen. The aliens called themselves Zephyrians, and they appeared to be herbivorous creatures from low-gravity worlds. Their physiology suggested they had evolved without significant predators. Their reflexes were slow, their bones were hollow, and their nervous systems seemed designed for processing large amounts of information rather than quick physical responses. Most importantly, Lisa had discovered something that gave her hope. The Zephyrians showed signs of prey animal psychology. They relied on intimidation and overwhelming force because they were naturally inclined to avoid actual combat. When faced with an enemy that refused to be intimidated, they seemed to have no backup plan. General Morrison absorbed this information and began forming new strategies. If the aliens were essentially spacefaring deer, then humans were the wolves. They had never learned to fear. The key would be using human advantages in speed, aggression, and tactical thinking to overcome their technological superiority. Meanwhile, across the globe, human military forces were adapting with the speed and flexibility that had made their species the dominant predator on Earth. Captain Maria Santos led a special forces unit that had been studying captured alien equipment. They had learned to bypass alien security systems and turn their own weapons against them. The first major test came when Santos and her team launched a raid on an alien supply depot that had been established on the lunar surface. The Zephyrians had never considered that their enemies might attack at night or use stealth tactics. Their sensors were designed to detect large energy signatures, not small groups moving carefully in darkness. Santos and her 12 team members landed on the far side of the moon and approached the alien base using natural cover. The Zephyrians had powerful shields and weapons, but they had not bothered to post guards or establish a perimeter defense. They simply did not think like creatures who had ever been hunted. The human team moved through the base like ghosts, killing sentries silently. and avoiding the automated defenses. The aliens never knew they were under attack until Santos placed explosive charges on their main power generators. By the time the base's alarms sounded, the humans were already escaping with stolen technology and 3 alien prisoners. The raid was a complete success, but more importantly, it sent a message to both sides. Humans had penetrated what the aliens considered an impregnable position and had done it without losing a single soldier. The psychological impact was enormous. Dr. Sam Rodriguez led the team of engineers who began reverse engineering the captured alien technology. What they found confirmed Lisa's theories about Zephyrian psychology. The aliens built their machines to be operated by committees and consensus. Individual initiative was actually discouraged by their design philosophy. Human engineers began modifying the alien devices to work with human reflexes and decision-making processes. They stripped out the safety systems and automated controls that prevented rapid deployment. Within days, they had working prototypes of hybrid weapons that combined alien power sources with human tactical thinking. The Zephyrians responded by sending more ships to Earth orbit and demanding immediate surrender. They could not understand why the humans continued to resist after such a clear demonstration of superior firepower. Their own species would have submitted immediately when faced with such overwhelming odds, but humans were not like other species the Empire had encountered. They had evolved as persistence hunters who could track prey across vast distances and bring down creatures much larger than themselves through teamwork and determination. Being outgunned was not a reason to surrender, but simply another tactical problem to solve. General Morrison organized the Global Defense Network and began coordinating strikes against alien positions throughout the solar system. Human forces attacked with speed and unpredictability using tactics that the aliens had never seen before. They hit supply lines, communication arrays, and isolated outposts with surgical precision. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow logical military doctrine. Humans would sacrifice valuable equipment to achieve minor tactical advantages. They would attack positions that offered no strategic benefit just to keep their enemies confused and off balance. They seemed to enjoy the challenge of impossible. Odds Captain Santos led another mission to capture an alien communication relay near Mars. This time, the Zephyrians were ready for human stealth tactics, but they were not prepared for the sheer audacity of the attack. Santos and her team flew their ship directly at the alien position, broadcasting surrender messages right up until the moment they opened fire. The aliens had never encountered an enemy that would use deception and false signals as part of their standard tactics. In Zephyrian culture, lying was considered a serious crime, and military deception was almost unknown. They simply did not have the psychological framework to deal with human cunning. The Zephyrian High Command gathered in their crystal chamber deep within the home fleet and tried to understand what they had encountered on the third planet. Fleet Admiral Kethmore studied the reports from Commander Veltar with growing confusion, and something that felt suspiciously like fear. The humans were not behaving like any species the Empire had ever subjugated. Instead of cowering before superior technology, they had become more aggressive and coordinated. Their attacks showed a level of tactical sophistication that seemed impossible for such a primitive civilization. Agent Tyler Brooks crouched in the ventilation shaft of the Zephyrian command ship and listened to the alien conversation below. Getting aboard the vessel had been surprisingly easy once his team figured out that the aliens never expected enemies to infiltrate their ships. The concept of boarding actions was completely foreign to creatures who preferred to fight it long. Range Brooks and his team had approached the alien vessel in a captured shuttle using proper identification codes. The Zephyrians had sensors that could detect human technology, but they could not read human intentions or predict human behavior. They had allowed the shuttle to dock without question. Now Brooks moved through the ship like a predator stalking prey. The aliens had not designed their vessels with internal security in mind. There were no guard posts or security cameras in the corridors. The Zephyrians simply could not imagine that enemies would be bold enough to enter their private spaces. Intelligence Brooks gathered was invaluable. He learned that the Zephyrian Empire controlled hundreds of worlds but had never faced serious military resistance. Their standard procedure was to demonstrate overwhelming force and wait for surrender. They had no experience with prolonged warfare or determined enemies. More importantly, Brooks discovered that human presence had a profound psychological effect on the aliens. The Zephyrians who encountered humans directly showed signs of extreme stress and anxiety. Their heart rates increased, their breathing became rapid, and they showed clear symptoms of prey, animal fear responses. Dr. Lisa Hamilton confirmed this discovery when she interrogated the alien prisoners captured during the lunar raid. The Zephyrians were physically unable to remain calm in human presence. Something about human body language, facial expressions, and even scent triggered deep instinctual responses that they could not control. The aliens described humans as apex predators in terms that revealed their own evolutionary history. The Zephyrians had evolved on worlds where large predators had been eliminated millions of years ago. They had no natural defenses against creatures like humans who combined intelligence with predatory instincts. Lisa realized that humans represented something completely outside Zephyrian experience. The Empire had grown powerful by controlling herbivorous species who shared similar psychological patterns. They had never encountered intelligent predators who could match their technology while retaining the hunting instincts of their ancestors, Commander. Nina Walsh used this knowledge to organize resistance cells across Earth that exploited alien weaknesses with ruthless efficiency. Human guerrilla fighters learned to appear suddenly, strike hard, and vanish before the aliens could respond. The Zephyrians had sensors that could track human weapons, but they could not predict where humans would attack next. The aliens tried to establish patterns and rules for human behavior, but failed completely. Humans would attack military targets one day and infrastructure the next. They would strike during alien day cycles, then switch to night attacks without warning. They showed no respect for the logical progression of military campaigns. Walsh coordinated these seemingly random attacks into a pattern that slowly degraded alien capabilities without presenting clear targets for retaliation. Human forces would destroy communication relays, then attack supply convoys, then sabotage power stations in sequences that appeared random but steadily weakened Zephyrian operations. The psychological warfare was just as effective as the physical attacks. Human forces began broadcasting messages that played on alien fears and insecurities. They described in detail what humans had done to other predators on Earth and promised similar fates for any aliens who remained in human space. Agent Brooks completed his infiltration mission by planting listening devices throughout the command ship, then escaping during a shift change when alien crew members were distracted. The aliens never realized their security had been compromised until human forces began targeting their ships with impossible accuracy. The intelligence Brooks provided revealed the true scope of Zephyrian vulnerability. The Empire had grown complacent after centuries of easy victories over peaceful species. Their military doctrine was based on intimidation rather than actual combat capability. When intimidation failed, they had no effective backup strategies. Dr. Hamilton made another crucial discovery while studying alien communication patterns. The Zephyrians relied heavily on central command and control systems because individual initiative was discouraged in their culture. When human attacks disrupted their communications, entire alien units would become paralyzed and unable to respond effectively. This weakness became apparent during a major battle near Jupiter, where Captain Santos led a coordinated attack on a Zephyrian supply fleet. Human forces targeted the alien command ships first, then watched as the remaining vessels became confused and disorganized without central direction. The aliens had superior weapons and shields, but they could not adapt quickly to changing tactical situations. Human forces could split up, regroup, and change strategies in real time, while the Zephyrians needed time to consult with their commanders and receive new orders. Santos exploited this weakness by keeping her forces in constant motion and never attacking the same target twice in the same way. The aliens would adapt their defenses to counter human tactics, but by then, the humans had already moved on to completely different approaches. The battle ended with the destruction of most of the alien supply fleet and the capture of several intact vessels. More importantly, it demonstrated that human forces could defeat larger alien formations through superior tactics and flexibility. News of the victory spread throughout the solar system and reached other worlds controlled by the Zephyrian Empire. For the first time in centuries, subject species began to question whether their alien overlords were truly invincible. Reports of successful human resistance inspired rebellions on distant planets. The Zephyrian High Command realized they faced a crisis unlike anything in their history. The humans were not just resisting conquest, they were actively hunting Zephyrian forces and winning battles against superior numbers and technology. Worse yet, their example was inspiring other species to rebel against imperial authority. Fleet Admiral Kethmore stood before the holographic display showing the Empire's territory and watched red warning indicators spread like a disease across dozens of worlds. The human resistance had been active for only 6 weeks, but already their influence was tearing apart the careful order that had taken millennia to establish. The Admiral's pale green skin had taken on an unhealthy gray tinge as stress hormones flooded his system. Reports flowed in from across the galaxy describing uprisings on worlds that had been peaceful for centuries. The subject species were using human tactics and displaying aggression that the Zephyrians had never seen before. Captain Danny Foster led the human fleet that had somehow assembled itself from captured alien vessels and converted civilian ships. The humans had taken Zephyrian technology and modified it in ways that violated every safety protocol and design principle. Their ships were faster and more maneuverable, but also more dangerous to operate. Foster's fleet struck at the Zephyrian staging area near Jupiter's moons with tactics that seemed designed to create maximum psychological impact rather than strategic advantage. Human ships would appear suddenly, fire a few shots, and vanish before the aliens could respond. They targeted communication arrays and sensor networks, leaving Zephyrian forces blind and confused. The humans seemed to understand that fear was more valuable than firepower when fighting an enemy that had never learned to cope with being hunted. Every attack was designed to make the aliens feel vulnerable and isolated. Human forces would strike, then broadcast messages describing exactly how they had penetrated Zephyrian defenses. Engineer Roy Mitchell had developed weapons specifically designed to exploit alien psychology and physiology. These devices produced sounds and energy patterns that triggered panic responses in Zephyrian nervous systems. The weapons were not particularly deadly, but they spread terror through alien formations like wildfire. Mitchell's sonic disruptors could paralyze entire Zephyrian units by overwhelming their sensitive hearing with frequencies that humans found merely annoying. His strobe weapons produced light patterns that caused seizures in alien visual cortexes. Most effective of all were his pheromone dispensers that released synthetic human scent compounds. The artificial human scents triggered such powerful fear responses that some Zephyrian crews abandoned their posts and fled even when their ships were not under direct attack. The aliens could not help their instinctual reactions any more than humans could stop jumping at loud noises or flinching from sudden movements. Admiral Kethmore realized that the Empire faced an enemy unlike anything in their experience. The humans fought with the coordinated savagery of pack hunters who had learned to use advanced technology. They showed no respect for the rules of civilized warfare and seemed to enjoy terrorizing their opponents. Desperate to regain control, the Zephyrian High Command authorized increasingly extreme measures. They began deploying planet-killer weapons designed to crack worlds that harbored rebellion. The first target was a mining world where the local population had driven off their Zephyrian overseers using human-inspired tactics, but the humans had somehow learned about the planet-killer deployment and were waiting when the weapon emerged from hyperspace. Foster's fleet attacked with suicidal determination, using their ships as guided missiles when conventional weapons proved insufficient. The planet killer was destroyed, but most of the human attack force died in the assault. The sacrifice shocked both sides for different reasons. The Zephyrians could not understand why any species would accept such massive losses to save strangers on a distant world. In their culture, individual survival always took priority over abstract principles like justice or freedom. The humans mourned their dead, but also celebrated the victory in ways that terrified alien observers. Human media broadcasts showed crowds cheering the destruction of the planet killer while simultaneously honoring the crews who had died to stop it. The aliens saw this as evidence of dangerous mental instability. Admiral Chris Bennett took command of the surviving human forces and began organizing a counterattack that would target Zephyrian-controlled systems throughout the galaxy. The humans had learned to operate captured alien ships and were recruiting freed populations to serve as crew members. Bennett's strategy was based on the principle that the Empire's greatest weakness was its size and complexity. The Zephyrians controlled hundreds of worlds through fear and overwhelming force, but they had never needed to defend against a coordinated rebellion. Their security forces were designed to suppress unarmed populations, not fight determined guerrilla armies. Human advisors began appearing on rebel worlds, teaching alien populations how to fight effectively against their former masters. They showed the freed species how to modify captured weapons, how to organize resistance cells, and most importantly, how to overcome the psychological conditioning that had kept them submissive for so long. The humans discovered that most of the Empire's subject species were naturally more aggressive than the Zephyrians, but had been conditioned to suppress their fighting instincts. Once this conditioning was broken, they proved to be effective allies who understood their former oppressors' weaknesses better than the humans did. Dr. Lisa Hamilton worked with alien defectors to develop new weapons and tactics that exploited Zephyrian vulnerabilities. She learned that the Empire's ruling class had undergone genetic modification to remove aggressive tendencies from their population. This made them excellent administrators, but terrible warriors. The modified Zephyrians could not function effectively under combat stress. Their enhanced intelligence became a liability when they were forced to make rapid decisions under pressure. They would freeze up or make obviously poor choices when faced with immediate physical danger. Hamilton shared this information with human military commanders who began targeting Zephyrian leadership directly. Special forces teams would infiltrate alien command centers and capture or eliminate key officers, knowing that replacements would be even less effective under combat conditions. The psychological impact of these targeted assassinations was devastating to Zephyrian morale. The aliens had never experienced warfare where their leaders were specifically hunted by enemy forces. The concept of command being a dangerous position was completely foreign to their military culture. Ambassador Claire Patterson delivered humanity's formal response to Zephyrian peace overtures in terms that left no room for misinterpretation. The humans demanded complete withdrawal from the solar system, recognition of human sovereignty, and reparations for the murdered civilians. They also insisted on the freedom of all species currently under Zephyrian control. The aliens were baffled by negotiations conducted from a position of strength by a technically inferior opponent. In their experience, peace talks only happened after one side had been completely defeated. The idea that humans could make demands while still fighting was incomprehensible to creatures who preferred submission to conflict. Emperor Zalthek of the Zephyrian Empire made the decision that would define the fate of his civilization as he authorized the deployment of the Empire's most terrible weapon. The Worldbreaker had been constructed in secret over centuries as the ultimate guarantee of imperial authority. It could crack a planet's crust and turn entire worlds into lifeless rocks. The Emperor's Council had debated for days about using such an extreme measure against the human homeworld. Some argued that destroying Earth would only create more martyrs and inspire greater resistance throughout the galaxy. Others insisted that decisive action was necessary to prevent the complete collapse of Imperial Authority pilot Kate Johnson received the warning about the world breaker from human intelligence networks just hours before the massive weapon would emerge from hyperspace. The device was the size of a small moon and heavily defended by the most powerful ships in the Zephyrian fleet. Any attack would be a suicide mission with almost no chance of success. Johnson volunteered to lead the desperate assault along with 24 other pilots who knew they would not survive the mission. Their ships were loaded with every explosive device that human engineers could construct, including several nuclear warheads that had been modified with alien technology. The battle began as soon as the world breaker dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. Human forces attacked with the fury of cornered predators, knowing that failure meant the death of their entire species. Johnson's squadron flew directly into the defensive fire, ignoring impossible odds. The Zephyrian escorts fought with desperation, equal to the humans, but they lacked the psychological conditioning for suicide attacks. When their shields failed, or their weapons were damaged, they would try to withdraw and repair, rather than press the attack regardless of personal cost. Johnson's ship broke through the defensive perimeter and made contact with the world breakers' hull just as the weapon began its final targeting sequence. Her nuclear charges detonated inside the device's control center, causing a cascade failure that tore the massive structure apart. The explosion was visible from Earth as a new star that burned for several minutes before fading to nothing. Kate Johnson and her entire squadron died in the blast, but they had saved humanity's homeworld and dealt the Empire a blow from which it would never recover. News of the world breaker's destruction spread throughout the galaxy within hours. Subject species that had remained neutral suddenly declared their independence from imperial rule. Zephyrian garrisons found themselves surrounded by hostile populations that no longer feared their former masters. Admiral Chris Bennett organized the human counteroffensive that would carry the war directly to Zephyrian territory. Using captured ships and hybrid technology, human forces began liberating imperial worlds with the support of local populations who had been waiting centuries. For this opportunity, the freed aliens proved to be enthusiastic allies once they overcame their conditioning against violence. Many species had warrior traditions that predated imperial conquest, but had been suppressed under Zephyrian rule. Human advisors helped them rediscover their fighting heritage and adapt it to modern warfare. Dr. Lisa Hamilton made a crucial breakthrough when she analyzed the brain chemistry of captured Zephyrian officers. The Empire's ruling class had been genetically modified over many generations to reduce aggressive impulses and increase cooperative behavior. This made them excellent administrators but helpless in actual combat situations. The modifications had been so extensive that modern Zephyrians were physically incapable of functioning under high stress. Their enhanced intelligence networks would shut down when faced with immediate danger, leaving them confused and vulnerable. They were literally too civilized to fight effectively. Hamilton shared this discovery with military commanders who began developing tactics specifically designed to overwhelm Zephyrian cognitive abilities. Human forces would create chaotic battle conditions with multiple simultaneous threats that alien commanders could not process quickly enough to counter. The strategy proved devastatingly effective during the liberation of the Altair system, where a small human fleet defeated a much larger Zephyrian force through superior tactical flexibility. The aliens had better weapons and stronger shields, but they could not adapt to rapidly changing battle conditions. Admiral Bennett coordinated attacks across 17 different star systems, simultaneously forcing the Empire to divide their attention and resources. Each human force was smaller than the defending Zephyrian fleets, but they attacked with such ferocity and unpredictability that the aliens could not mount effective resistance. The liberated populations provided crucial intelligence about Zephyrian military capabilities and weaknesses. They revealed that the Empire maintained control through a complex network of communication relays and administrative centers rather than raw military power. Disrupting these systems would paralyze Imperial operations across vast regions human. Engineering teams led by Roy Mitchell developed viruses that could infiltrate Zephyrian computer networks and cause systematic failures. The aliens had never encountered cyber warfare because their own species lacked the aggressive mindset necessary to develop such weapons. The computer viruses spread through Imperial networks like digital plagues, causing ships to lose navigation, communications to fail, and weapons to malfunction at critical moments. Zephyrian technicians could repair individual systems, but they could not prevent reinfection because they did not understand the predatory logic behind human programming. Commander Veltar found himself trapped aboard a crippled flagship as human. Forces closed in on the Imperial home system. His crew was paralyzed by stress hormones and could barely function under combat conditions. The proud fleet that had once terrorized primitive worlds was being systematically destroyed by creatures they had dismissed as animals. Veltar finally understood what the Empire had awakened on that distant blue world. Humans were not just another intelligent species to be cataloged and controlled. They were apex predators who had learned to use technology without losing the hunting instincts that had carried them to the top of their world's food chain. The realization came too late to save his civilization. Human forces were already approaching the core worlds of the Empire, carrying with them an alliance of freed species who sought revenge for centuries of oppression. The galaxy's oldest civilization was about to fall to its youngest and most dangerous inhabitants. The final battle for the Zephyrian home system began with Admiral Chris Bennett's combined fleet emerging from hyperspace around the ancient capital world. The massive armada included ships from dozens of liberated species united under human command and driven by centuries of suppressed anger against their former oppressors. Emperor Zalthek watched from his crystal palace as human vessels moved through his defenses like predators stalking wounded prey. The Imperial fleet was larger and more heavily armed, but the crews were paralyzed by stress and fear. Many ships surrendered without firing a shot when human forces targeted them. Directly, General Jake Morrison led the ground assault on the Imperial capital, using tactics that the Zephyrians had never imagined possible. Human Marines and their alien allies moved through the city's defensive systems with surgical precision targeting command centers while avoiding civilian areas. The Emperor's personal guard consisted of genetically modified Zephyrians who had been bred for loyalty and obedience, rather than combat effectiveness. When human forces breached the palace walls, these elite soldiers simply froze in terror, unable to process the reality of armed enemies in their sacred spaces. Captain Maria Santos found herself face-to-face with Commander Veltar in the palace's main command center. The alien officer who had ordered the destruction of Earth's coastal cities now cowered behind his control console as Santos approached with weapons drawn. Veltar expected to be executed immediately, but Santos instead offered him a choice. He could surrender honorably and help establish a peaceful transition of power, or he could die uselessly, defending a system that had already failed. The commander chose survival and began transmitting surrender orders to all Imperial forces. War ended not with a climactic explosion, but with a simple broadcast from Emperor Zalthek himself. Faced with the complete collapse of his military and the reality of human forces surrounding his throne room, the Emperor formally surrendered. The Zephyrian Empire and all its territories, Admiral Bennett accepted the surrender with terms that surprised both allies and enemies. Humans had proven themselves capable of total victory, but they chose restraint instead of revenge. The Zephyrian leadership would be held accountable for their crimes, but the civilian population would be protected and allowed to rebuild their society. Dr. Lisa Hamilton led the commission tasked with establishing a new galactic order based on cooperation rather than domination. Her research into Zephyrian psychology proved invaluable in designing rehabilitation programs that could help the former Imperial species overcome their genetic conditioning against self-defense. The liberated worlds formed the Galactic Federation, with humanity serving as protectors rather than rulers. Human military advisors helped each species develop their own defense forces, while human scientists shared technology freely with their new allies. Roy Mitchell's engineering teams began the massive task of converting Imperial infrastructure to serve peaceful purposes. Weapons factories became manufacturing centers, surveillance networks became communication systems, and prison worlds became refugee settlements for displaced populations. The transition was not without challenges. Some Zephyrian extremists attempted to restart the war using hidden weapons caches and secret military units. Human special forces hunted down these holdouts with the same relentless efficiency they had shown during the Liberation campaign. Other species struggled to overcome centuries of conditioning that had taught them to submit to authority without question. Human counselors worked with alien psychologists to develop therapy programs that could restore natural aggressive instincts while channeling them into constructive activities. Captain Santos established the Terran Defense Corps as a rapid response force that could intervene anywhere in the galaxy when peaceful species faced threats they could not handle alone. The Corps became a symbol of human commitment to protecting those who could not protect themselves. Danny Foster commanded the exploration fleets that ventured beyond known space, searching for other civilizations that might threaten the new galactic order. These missions discovered dozens of worlds inhabited by species that had been hiding from Imperial expansion for millennia. The most important discovery came when human explorers encountered the Vanguard, a confederation of warrior species that had been fighting a losing battle against Zephyrian expansion for thousands of years. These aliens welcomed humanity as kindred spirits and valuable allies in maintaining galactic stability. Dr. Hamilton's final research project involved studying the evolutionary patterns that had produced such different outcomes on various worlds. She concluded that most intelligent species evolved along either predator or prey pathways, with very few managing to balance both tendencies successfully. Humans were unique because they had retained their predatory instincts while developing the cooperative behaviors necessary for advanced civilization. This combination made them ideal protectors for species that had evolved past their own ability to defend themselves. The galaxy settled into a new equilibrium, with humans serving as the apex predators who kept more aggressive species in check, while protecting peaceful civilizations from exploitation. It was a role that humanity accepted reluctantly, but performed with dedication. Commander Veltar spent his remaining years writing memoirs that became required reading in Federation schools. His account of first contact with humanity served as a warning about the dangers of underestimating any species and the importance of approaching other civilizations with respect rather than arrogance. The former Imperial officer often reflected on the moment when he first saw humans respond to attack with unified rage rather than submission. He realized now that the Empire had made a fundamental error in assuming that all intelligent life would follow the same evolutionary pathway that had produced Zephyrian civilization. 20 years after the war's end, Ambassador Claire Patterson delivered a speech at the Federation's founding ceremony that captured the new reality. Humanity had proven that strength and compassion were not contradictory, but complementary. The galaxy's apex predators had chosen to be guardians rather than conquerors. The speech concluded with words that became the Federation's unofficial motto. Peace was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. Freedom was not given by the strong to the weak, but taken by those with the courage to fight for it. And civilization was not the elimination of predatory instincts, but their channeling toward protective purposes. In the end, the aliens had been right about one thing. They had indeed awakened a predator when they attacked Earth. But they had failed to understand that human predators hunted to protect their pack, and their pack now included every peaceful species in the galaxy.